It was once called the eighth wonder of the world. 40 million people a year walked through its doors, more than visited Disney World, the Grand Canyon, and Graceland combined. Entire travel packages were built around it. It had its own zip code. Today, it is fighting for its financial life. This is the rise and fall of the Mall of America, a $4 billion retail decline, the dream that became a blueprint. Before there was a single storefront, there was a stadium. Metropolitan Stadium in Bloomington, Minnesota, had been home to the Minnesota Twins and the Vikings for decades. It was the kind of place that held generations of memories, roaring crowds, pennant races, cold October evenings, until the Twins moved to the Metrodome in 1982 and the stadium became obsolete almost overnight. The Vikings followed. The city demolished it in 1985, leaving 78 acres of prime real estate sitting just minutes from Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport, with nothing on it but nostalgia and possibility. The Ghermezian family, the Canadian real estate dynasty behind the 555 Group, saw something there that most people didn't. They had already built the West Edmonton Mall in Alberta in 1981, the largest mall in the world at the time, and they had learned something valuable from that project. American consumers would go out of their way for spectacle. They would drive hours and plan vacations around a shopping center if that shopping center gave them enough reason to show up. The Ghermezians wanted to repeat that formula in the United States, only bigger. They pitched Bloomington officials on a concept so ambitious it was almost absurd. A fully enclosed, 4-story retail and entertainment complex unlike anything American consumers had ever seen. Not just a mall, a destination, a place with an amusement park inside it, a hotel, restaurants, an aquarium, a convention center, a miniature city tucked under one roof, insulated from the Minnesota winter, open year-round, drawing visitors from across the country and around the world. The original proposal was even larger than what eventually got built. After 555 struggled to secure long-term financing in the mid-1980s, they had to scale the project back and bring in partners. They eventually relinquished control of the development to Melvin Simon and Associates and the Teachers Insurance and Annuity Association, which together made up the bulk of the ownership structure. The Ghermezians retained a stake, but handed off the lead development role. In May 1988, the Bloomington Port Authority agreed to contribute $100 million toward infrastructure improvements, road upgrades, utility work, transit connections, not without controversy from local citizens who questioned whether public money should fund a private shopping center of this scale. In June 1989, Snoopy, and that is not a metaphor, joined city officials and local dignitaries at the groundbreaking ceremony. The choice of mascot was intentional. Camp Snoopy, the Peanuts-themed indoor amusement park licensed from Knott's Berry Farm, would be the emotional heart of the whole project. The thing that made it a family destination rather than just a very large store. 3 years of construction followed, costing more than $680 million by the time the building was complete. The architect was John Jerde of the Jerde Partnership, the same firm behind the Horton Plaza in San Diego and Fremont Street in Las Vegas. Designers known for creating spaces that felt theatrical, almost cinematic. Jerde designed the mall as an experience, not just a retail environment. 4 levels of storefronts wrapped around a central atrium where the amusement park would sit, open to the sky via a massive skylight, with enough visual complexity to keep your eyes moving regardless of which direction you looked. The whole thing had its own zip code, which tells you something about how seriously everyone was taking the scale of the undertaking. August 11th, 1992. The opening. When the doors opened on August 11th, 1992, at least 150,000 people showed up on the first day. Traffic backed up for miles on the surrounding highways. People had driven from neighboring states, some just to say they had been there. The local news coverage treated it like a moon landing. The scale of the thing was genuinely staggering for 1992. The building covered 4.2 million square feet across 4 levels. To put that in perspective, you could fit 7 Yankee stadiums inside it and still have room left over. The 4 original anchor stores were Nordstrom, Macy's, Bloomingdale's, and Sears, the 4 biggest names in American department retail at the time, all under one roof, giving the mall an instant credibility and a gravitational pull that smaller competitors simply couldn't match. Each anchor occupied a corner of the building, positioned to force shoppers to walk past hundreds of smaller stores to get from one end to the other. That was not an accident. Mall design is a science, and every square foot of the Mall of America had been calculated to maximize the time visitors spent inside it. At the center of it all was Camp Snoopy, a 7-acre indoor theme park complete with a roller coaster, a Ferris wheel, and water rides, all inside an enclosed, climate-controlled building in Minnesota. For a state that regularly hits 20 below in January, the novelty of an indoor summer was not small. Families who had nowhere to take their kids in February suddenly had an option. The rides were real, not scaled-down amusement park approximations. The roller coaster went fast enough to be genuinely exciting, which is more than you can say for most things you find inside a shopping center. The mall had 520 specialty stores, an 18-hole miniature golf course, and restaurants ranging from fast food to fine dining. It had its own transit connections, and eventually, its own light rail station. By 1996, the mall was drawing around 43 million visitors annually. That number is not a misprint. 43 million. The entire state of Minnesota has fewer than 6 million people. In 1996 alone, the Mall of America attracted more visitors than Disney World, the Grand Canyon, and Graceland combined, a statistic the mall repeated in virtually every press release for the next decade. Because, honestly, why wouldn't you? In 1996, the mall added Underwater World, a 1.2 million-gallon walk-through aquarium that later became Sea Life Minnesota. The Rainforest Cafe opened its first-ever location there in 1994. Retailers wanted in. Tourists planned entire vacations around visiting it. Travel agencies in Japan and South Korea were packaging Mall of America trips as American experiences, bundling it with Niagara Falls and New York City as something you had to see to believe. "We've created a destination," mall co-developer Mel Simon said at the time. "People don't come here just to buy a pair of shoes." That was exactly the point. And for a long time, it worked. The golden years. Through the late 1990s and into the early 2000s, the Mall of America operated as something close to a cultural institution. It hosted celebrity appearances, product launches, book signings, film premieres, and concerts. It had a wedding chapel where couples could get married between a pretzel stand and a sneaker store, which apparently hundreds of people decided was exactly what they wanted. There was a college campus inside the building for a while, a medical clinic, a dentist's office. You could, theoretically, handle every aspect of your life without ever leaving the parking ramp. The mall was genuinely recession-resistant for a while. When the dot-com bubble burst in 2000 and 2001, the Mall of America largely held steady. Its model, entertainment plus retail in a climate-controlled environment, had built-in advantages that a normal strip mall could not replicate. You didn't just go to buy things. You went because there was something to do, somewhere to eat, somewhere to take the kids. The mall had made itself hard to leave and, more importantly, hard to replace. You couldn't recreate Camp Snoopy from your living room couch in 1997. In 2004, the Metro Transit Blue Line light rail opened a station directly at the mall, connecting it to downtown Minneapolis and the airport. That made it even more accessible, and international arrivals who landed at MSP could take a train directly there without renting a car. The airport connection was genuinely smart planning and added a steady stream of tourists who had literally just landed in the country and were already primed to spend money. By 2008, the Camp Snoopy theme park was rebranded as Nickelodeon Universe, a partnership that brought SpongeBob, Dora the Explorer, and other characters into the mix. It updated the park for a new generation of kids whose parents had ridden the original roller coasters in the 1990s, which was, depending on how you feel about time passing, either heartwarming or mildly alarming. The rebrand required investment, but it kept the entertainment core of the property feeling current and relevant. Exactly the right instinct, even if no one quite understood yet how much that instinct would be tested. The mall underwent a major expansion and renovation starting in the fall of 2013, completing in 2015. A JW Marriott hotel with 342 rooms opened attached to the complex, adding an overnight hospitality dimension that turned the mall into something resembling a resort. Class A office space was added. A new north entrance was installed with an iconic star sculpture, The footprint grew to 5.6 million square feet. The expansion cost around $200 million, and at the time, it looked like a sound investment. The mall was evolving, growing, adapting. By every measure, the formula was still working. That confidence would not last much longer. The cracks begin to show. The trouble with being the biggest is that you have nowhere to hide when things start going wrong. American retail had been under pressure since the 2008 financial crisis. As consumer spending contracted during the Great Recession, department stores, the traditional anchors that malls depended on to drive foot traffic, began their long, slow retreat. Sears, which had been a fixture of American mall culture since the 1970s, started closing hundreds of locations and eventually filed for bankruptcy in 2018. JCPenney went through bankruptcy in 2020. Lord & Taylor, a department store that had been operating in America since 1826, closed for good. These weren't minor tenants occupying one corner of the food court. These were the stores that malls were literally built around, the reason people drove to the parking lot in the first place. When they left, they didn't just leave empty square footage behind. They left a hole in the logic of the whole enterprise. At the Mall of America specifically, the anchor losses came in waves. Bloomingdale's was the first to go in 2012. Then Sears announced the closure of its MOA location in 2019, leaving behind a cavernous void in the building that the mall scrambled to reimagine. By the time Sears shut its MOA doors, it had been operating in financial distress for years, and no one was exactly shocked. But a closed Sears anchor space is not a space you easily fill. Department stores occupy enormous square footage specifically designed for their layout. High ceilings, wide floor plates, dedicated loading infrastructure. Subdividing that space for smaller tenants is expensive, complicated, and time-consuming. And the longer that space sits half-vacant and under renovation, the more it signals to everyone walking past that something has changed. The mall tried to pivot with intelligence and energy. Rather than chasing large retailers who were no longer expanding anyway, it started leaning into entertainment and unique concepts. CMX movie theaters, Savage X Fenty by Rihanna, Wahlburgers, experiential retail, celebrity-driven pop-ups. 24 new stores opened in 2018 alone. The strategy was to become even more of a destination. Less a place to buy things, and more a place to have experiences that the internet genuinely could not replicate, at least not yet. A website cannot give you a roller coaster ride or a sea lion show. The mall understood this, and it leaned into it hard. It was a reasonable idea. It was also an idea that depended on something fragile: the sustained willingness of people to leave their homes for experiences in enclosed public spaces. The pandemic would test that assumption in ways no business plan could have anticipated. Amazon and the Great Retail Reckoning. The rise of e-commerce was not a sudden event. Amazon had been chipping away at brick-and-mortar retail since the late 1990s, but the shift accelerated sharply in the 2000s. By 2019, e-commerce accounted for more than 11% of total U.S. retail sales. Consumers could browse unlimited inventory, read reviews, compare prices, and have items delivered to their door, often for free, often overnight. The mall, for all its entertainment value, could not match that convenience for someone who just needed a spatula and didn't feel like driving anywhere. The United States also had a structural problem that had been building for decades. The country had built far too many malls. By some estimates, America had roughly 24 square feet of shopping center space per person, far more than any other country in the world. Not all of that space could survive in a retail environment that was fundamentally shifting away from physical stores. The weaker properties fell first, then the mid-tier ones. Then the pressure started reaching even the strongest. For the Mall of America, the problem was not that its numbers collapsed overnight. It was that the math started moving in the wrong direction and didn't stop. Foot traffic held reasonably well compared to struggling B and C grade malls around the country, but holding steady is not the same as growing, and the mall carried enormous operational costs: utilities, security, maintenance, staffing, across 5.6 million square feet. When revenue per square foot starts dipping, those fixed costs become a serious problem very quickly. Anchor store closures triggered what real estate analysts call co-tenancy clauses. When a major anchor closes, smaller tenants in the same mall often have the contractual right to reduce their rent. because their lease agreements were negotiated on the assumption that the anchor would drive traffic to the whole property. So an anchor closure doesn't just create a vacant space, it creates a revenue reduction across the entire mall. The domino effect is quiet but relentless. Retailers watching the vacancy rate climb start wondering whether they should be renewing their own leases. Some don't. Younger consumers, the generation that grew up with smartphones, never developed the mall habit to begin with. The mall was a social hub for Generation X and older millennials. For younger shoppers, the internet was the social hub, and shopping was something you did with your phone between everything else. As retail analyst Neil Saunders observed, malls needed to fundamentally rethink their reason for existing, not just redecorate and hope for the best. The pandemic arrives. In March 2020, the Mall of America closed entirely for the first time in its history. It had operated through blizzards, recessions, and security incidents, but nothing had ever shut it down completely until the COVID-19 pandemic. The closure lasted months for a property built entirely around in-person human traffic. 40 million people a year walking through the doors. Every day the lights were off was a day with no revenue against ongoing costs that didn't pause. The mall had gone into the pandemic in a more stable position than most regional malls. It had taken genuine steps to diversify its revenue beyond traditional retail. The hotel, the office space, the entertainment venues. These were all part of a deliberate strategy to make the property resilient. But even entertainment destinations lost their value when entertainment itself shut down. Nickelodeon Universe sat dark. Restaurants closed or went to takeout. The Sea Life Aquarium, the movie theaters, the comedy clubs, all of it stopped. Being an entertainment destination, when entertainment had dropped in value for consumers, made the situation even more difficult, as mall consultants at the time noted. When the mall began reopening in June 2020, foot traffic was deeply suppressed. Capacity restrictions, lingering public health anxiety, and the surge in online shopping created by the lockdowns all combined to keep people away from enclosed public spaces. By the end of the third quarter of 2020, e-commerce had surged to 16.1% of all U.S. retail sales, a number that had been projected to take years to reach organically. The pandemic compressed what would have been a gradual multi-year trend into a matter of months, and many of the shopping habits that consumers developed during that period proved permanent. Retailers inside the mall were grappling with their own survival. Major chains including J.Crew and Neiman Marcus filed for bankruptcy in 2020. Even after restrictions lifted, the revenue recovery was slow and uneven. The mall's owners were simultaneously dealing with reduced foot traffic, difficulty collecting rent from struggling tenants, and the operating costs of running a 5.6 million square foot complex. The financial stress was real, and it was about to get significantly more complicated from an unexpected direction. The American Dream problem. Here is where the story takes a genuinely unexpected turn. Because the financial trouble with the Mall of America is not just about the Mall of America. 555 Group, the Ghermezian family's company, had spent years developing a new megamall project in East Rutherford, New Jersey, the American Dream Mall. The project had a long, troubled history under multiple previous owners before 555 took it over and decided to finish what others had started. They spent years completing it and opened in October 2019. The timing, as you can imagine, was not ideal. The mall had barely drawn breath before the pandemic shut everything down. An indoor ski slope, a DreamWorks water park, a Nickelodeon theme park. All of it closed before it ever found its footing. To fund the American Dream project, 555 had borrowed $1.2 billion in private construction loans in 2017 and taken on more than $1.7 billion in total debt. As part of that loan agreement, the company used its other flagship properties, including the Mall of America, as collateral. That is the kind of decision that looks reasonable when everything is working and catastrophic when it isn't. When American Dream struggled financially and 555 defaulted on those construction loans in early 2021, the collateral provisions kicked in. A group of lenders led by J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs, along with Starwood Capital, Soros Fund Management, and others, seized a 49% equity stake in the Mall of America. The Ghermezians were not being evicted. Their senior vice president explained publicly that the stake represented a share of future profits, not ownership of the property itself. But the situation was a stark illustration of how badly the American Dream project had strained the entire 555 empire. American Dream lost $60 million in 2021 alone. The reserve account set up to make bond payments got so depleted that at one point in early 2022, it held a balance of $878.50. That is not a typo. $878.50. In an account meant to service over $1 billion in bond debt. The Mall of America, which had been pledged as security for another mall's debts, was now partly controlled by a group of Wall Street lenders trying to recover their money. For the flagship of American retail ambition, it was a humbling development that would have seemed unimaginable in 1992. What the mall looks like today. The Mall of America is still open. It is still the largest mall in the United States. By its 30th anniversary in 2022, an estimated 1.2 billion total visitors had walked through its doors since opening, a cumulative figure that represents a remarkable sustained draw, even accounting for the down years. Nickelodeon Universe still runs. The Sea Life Aquarium still has fish in it. The JW Marriott is still taking reservations. On a busy weekend, the parking ramps still fill up, and the food court still smells like cinnamon pretzels and fried food the way it always has. But the landscape around it has changed in ways that are hard to reverse. Of the 4 original anchor stores that opened in 1992, 2 remain. Nordstrom has stayed and remains one of the few department store chains that has managed the transition to modern retail with its reputation largely intact. Macy's is still there for now, though Macy's nationally has been closing more than 150 locations through 2026 as part of what the company calls its bold new chapter restructuring, a name that makes the mass closure of American retail institutions sound inspirational. The company had already shuttered more than a third of its namesake stores over the prior decade. Whether the Macy's at Mall of America survives those cuts is not something anyone has definitively answered. The spaces left behind by Bloomingdale's and Sears have been partially reimagined. The mall has leaned hard into entertainment, unique dining concepts, and celebrity-driven retail. The strategy has had genuine successes. The CMX movie theater complex, the addition of experiential brands, a steady rotation of pop-up events and activations. But entertainment destinations carry their own vulnerabilities. They require significant operating investment, constant maintenance, and sustained consumer demand for in-person experiences in a world that has grown comfortable with the alternative. An indoor water park has been part of the ongoing expansion plan, adding yet another layer of amusement to the complex. There are also plans for additional residential and mixed-use development in the broader Bloomington property. The mall is essentially attempting to build a small city around itself, adding layers of everyday life, housing, hospitality, offices, that would make it less dependent on retail foot traffic and more anchored in the fabric of the community. Whether that transformation arrives in time to solve the underlying financial pressures is a question without a clean answer yet. The broader American mall landscape has thinned considerably. Of the roughly 1,000 enclosed malls that existed in the United States at the height of the mall era, a significant portion are expected to close or be converted in the coming years. Abandoned mall space is increasingly being repurposed into apartments, medical offices, warehouses, and community colleges. Adaptive reuse projects that say something fairly direct about the distance between what these buildings were designed for and what the economy needs from them now. The model that produced the Mall of America in 1992 belongs, in many ways, to a different country than the one we're living in today, a monument to its own moment. The Mall of America was built on a specific set of assumptions: that Americans would keep driving to large enclosed spaces to shop, that department store anchors would keep anchoring, that the experience of being in a place like this would remain compelling decade after decade, that growth would continue because it had always continued, and that the appetite for spectacle was inexhaustible. For a long time, those assumptions held. For 30 years, the mall drew crowds, generated revenue, and remained, by most measures, a genuine marvel of retail engineering and entertainment programming. What happened to it was not a failure of vision. It was a collision between an institution built for one era and the forces of the next one. E-commerce, the 2008 recession, the slow implosion of department store culture, the pandemic, And finally, the financial entanglement of an overextended empire in New Jersey. All of it arrived at different times, hit from different directions, and compounded in ways that would have been impossible to fully predict in any single year. No single blow was enough to finish it. The weight just kept adding up, year after year, a little more each time. There is something almost poignant about the fact that the Mall of America's troubles are partly the result of ambition that had nothing to do with Minnesota. The American Dream Mall in New Jersey, a project conceived as a triumph, and the next chapter for the same family that built MOA ended up endangering it. The Gurmezians bet on themselves one time too many at one time too big, and when that bet went sideways, it pulled their original masterpiece into the fallout. It is not the story anyone would have predicted in 1992 when 150,000 people lined up on a summer morning in Bloomington to see something they had never seen before. Former Minnesota Governor Tim Walz once described the Mall of America as a Minnesota icon and one of America's great destinations. He was not wrong. It is also, at this point, a monument to both the heights of retail ambition and the limits of what ambition can sustain when the world decides it wants something different. The mall still stands. It still opens its doors every morning. Whether it can fully reinvent itself for the world that exists now, rather than the one it was built for, is the real question. And the answer is still being written. If you found this story worth your time, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. There's a lot more history like this. Stories of places and empires that rose to the top and then had to reckon with what comes after.